This is Joshua Treviño, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
That's right. We are breaking it down. Joshua has his own show. It's called Hard Country. And I guess let's just start right there. What is the need for Hard Country? What is your goal? And by the way, you guys are far enough in the water now that you are among the greatest shows of all time, because by just surviving past 20 just puts you in the higher echelons of what exists. But what your content is
like being a bomber crew. If you make it to 25, like you're going to survive the thing. Is that
yeah.
It?
You're an ace.
Yeah, right. 25 missions. The Hard Country is a show that I do with a colleague at the Texas Public Policy Foundation named Melissa Ford, and she's absolutely outstanding. And we talk about the hardest countries of all, Mexico and Texas, and recognizing that one requires the other, one does not exist without the other, and the reality is that it is 200 years, depending on how you're counting, maybe 300 years of fraught coexistence, violence, tumult, trade, exchange within and among those two countries. And that's really what the topic of the Hard Country is. I'll tell you, one of the questions that we had at the beginning when we started the show was, are we going to run out of content after a certain point? And man, I can tell you after over a year, that is never going to happen. In fact, wilder things have come to pass since this show began than I ever envisioned when we started. And that's really what the Hard Country is about.
I love it. And you're right. The gifts that you're going to get, you shouldn't try to pre-designate what they will be, because your show will outgrow you. It'll outgrow the foundation. It will become its own thing if you continue to put value into it and exchange these ideas. I want to take us away from your home turf a little bit, because I think there's a useful exercise here. We look at conflicts like Ukraine and Russia as if they are light switches on and off, right?
Yeah.
But you just told us that the U.S., Texas, Mexico, the Spanish have had a running conflict for 300 plus years.
Yeah.
So when we do manage to get this Ukraine-Russia conflict turned off, one of the things I worry about is, by the way, these guys are still going to be neighbors. They're still going to share infrastructure. How does that inform our foreign policy in general when you think about that? We can go back to Mexico and Texas if you want, but just in general, people don't understand that not everybody wants, just because the big people say, hey, we're not going to fight anymore, it doesn't mean that the other people below that are going to cooperate.
Yeah, well, I mean, are you asking for like a big picture, like global view on this, or specific?
Sure. Yeah, let's do a global view. Yeah.
I mean, the global view is something that firsthand, Pete, because it's been your profession for many years. War is with us always. And what you define as war varies a lot. And sometimes it's a threat of violence, sometimes it's real violence, sometimes it's high level, sometimes it's low level. And being able to understand that it's a spectrum, and being able to the extent that you can master that spectrum and control where you are on it is really the art of managing human existence and humanity. Yeah. There is no eschaton coming except for the one at the very end that we'll have nothing to do with. And so until then, there's going to be a perennial need for individuals to think critically about who their neighbor is and what their neighbor wants to do, for good or ill.
And then when you get a bunch of experts together, you are going to get a bunch of experts who disagree. You and I probably disagree on quite a few things with, and I have no expertise in Texas and Mexico, but if we're going to talk in general terms, we both had equal footing. We're going to disagree a lot, right? Yeah. But we can disagree collegially and say, yeah, you know what? And probably both of us go, neither of us are probably right. Somewhere either left or right of both of us is going to be the answer, if there is an answer.
Yeah, that's right. Expertise, by the way, is not required to hold an opinion, nor even to work in a senior level on a topic these days. So ask your average SES about that. And honestly, that's particularly true in the field where I work in Mexico and Latin American policy, unfortunately.
Is our relationship with, so a friend of mine works in industry where they use a lot of times Mexican labor, like factory labor, to manufacture just simple things like a packaging box or whatever, because that's sort of what they do. And he engineers that process. He speaks Spanish fluently, and so he's got a lot of understanding between these two worlds. And one of the beliefs is that whatever the U.S. wanted, they could come in and just turn off the cartels in Mexico. They could just defeat them, stabilize Mexico, and move on. Voila, right? And maybe there is some truth to that, but I think that that's way too simple.
Well, I don't think it's realistic. I certainly don't want to straw man views of your friend who I don't know
Yeah.
in candor. I will say in probable defense of his views, thinking through what would lead somebody to assert something like that, there is a lot that the United States could be doing that we choose not to do, a lot that we ought to do that we choose not to do, and things that I think would actually be very effective. One of the things that we talk about a lot in our sphere is very simple matters like linking trade and security. You don't get the benefits of trade with the United States unless you deliver security. By the way, failing to make that linkage is the same mistake we made with the Chinese, for example. We never linked trade and security with them, and now we're trying to hastily backfill it, candidly, when it's probably far too late. Should have been done 25 years ago. Same with Mexico. Mexico, which has benefited tremendously from trade with the United States, as have we benefited from trade with them. By the way, I'm a native of South Texas. There wouldn't really be a middle class in South Texas without the city of Monterrey, Mexico. So we're very cognizant of that. But at the same time, to borrow from Churchill, man is more than material computation, and we're more than an economic unit. And one of the things that we require is security and fellow feeling, neighborliness, goodwill, and that's what's been absent from the Mexican state. I don't mean Mexicans at large. I mean the Mexican state itself and its friends in the cartels for too long. So could we turn it off in a heartbeat? We could insulate ourselves from it pretty rapidly. Turning it off, though, I think is a qualitatively different issue, and that's going to take some time and work, no matter what path you choose.
How much is our administration, we tend to bang to the left, bang to the right on administration. How much is that hobbling our ability to improve, if we're able, stability between these two, we'll call them states, Texas and Mexico?
Sure. When you say administration, do you mean the Biden administration, or are you talking about something?
Well, just in general, our tendency to be like, and now the Republicans, and now the Democrats, and now the Republicans, and within that, mini shifts. We tend to be a little chaotic, and
Yeah.
I don't know, not bipolar, but
Yeah. Well, Mexico has obviously this changes in emphasis with every change of presidency. Not really every change of Congress in foreign policy, but every change of presidency. There's a change in emphasis, and there's a change in certainly the faces at the table. But I would say that Mexico has been troubled a lot less by that than a lot of other countries, in part because until really the past 4 years or so, Mexico has benefited from a bipartisan and generational consensus toward itself that holds a series of things that are unfortunately increasingly false, that it's a partner, that things are going to get better, that it's inevitably democratic, and so on. And so one of the discontinuities that we're seeing on the US side is that as Mexico in its current state incarnation slides into this left populist autocracy that's getting worse and worse into a form of quasi-military governance in a lot of sectors of the economy, our consensus hasn't kept up. So they've had the advantage of a lot of continuity with us, and we're not getting it from them.
Is it possible for them to deliver continuity to us?
It's absolutely possible. I mean, all this is a series of choices, right? Nobody forces, especially the top elites. Let me caveat what I'm about to say. I have a lot of sympathy for. I don't agree with, but I have a lot of sympathy for, like a low-level Mexican cop. I talked about this on The Hard Country at one point. A cop who is compelled into a modus vivendi with a local cartel because if he doesn't, he or his family will be killed. These are individuals, I think, that, again, while we don't agree with them and we want to shut down their activities, on a human level, we can empathize with them. I mean, God knows what I would do if I was put in the same position and my children were at threat or something like that. I mean, God forbid. The people who I don't have empathy for are the state governors, the cabinet officials, unfortunately, probably the president of Mexico himself at this point, who aren't under pressures like that, who do have options, and who make the positive choice to align themselves with criminals and criminality to enrich themselves, to achieve power, and so on. And those are the folks that require accountability from us, if need be, which is probably the case. And I think that is where our focus ought to be, policy and otherwise.
When we look at the policy things that we do, and I'm just going to be critical of us here for a minute, because I'm a believer that usually we are the bigger problem of our own problems. We haven't had a lot of strong foreign policy presidents for quite some time. So there is at least the inability to probably move forward, right?
Yeah.
And then should this be led by Texas or Texas and California, these kind of efforts? And should we follow the advice of these governors and saying, here's, like think about the military structure. It is not a brigade problem until it's a multi-battalion problem. It's not a battalion problem until it's a multi-company problem, right? And so
Right.
should the president simply go, I don't know, California, what do you think? And they're like, then it's a Texas problem. I'm going to stay out of it, right? Can that work? Or should it be led by Texas, California, Arizona, New Mexico?
Well, no institution is going to surrender power voluntarily in that way.
What?
So I don't care. I know it's shocking, right? So I don't care if you have the most historically based conservative administration in Washington, D.C. They're never going to surrender initiative to the various states. I'll probably to be proven wrong on that, by the way. And I think maybe by the end of the decade, I will be proven wrong, which would be fantastic. I'm wrong frequently, Pete. So put this in the hopper as one thing.
Same.
Yeah, right. But I think there's a broader problem here, which is that independent of presidential administration, it's almost shocking to say, but the United States really has not felt compelled on an existential level to engage in grand strategy for almost 30 years, maybe more than that. Since the end of the Cold War. That doesn't mean we haven't had a grand agenda. Remember when we were going to democratize the Middle East? Remember that?
Yeah.
So
I was there.
Oh, that's right. You were there. Yeah, it took up the lives of you and many friends. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How'd it go, by the way? Can I vacation at this point?
The AI robot says that it went great. It's a good example. And my ankle is currently in a cast because it needs to be rebuilt from that era of my life right now. So,
let me tell you, spending the flower of American youth on civilizing Kandahar was clearly the right move. We haven't engaged in grand strategy, and as a consequence of that, this kind of gets to your point about an absence of vision on our end. One of the places where we really just completely abdicated the need for strategy and the need for pursuit of national interest broadly defined is that since 1994 when we invaded Haiti. Actually, not the last time we invaded Haiti, but it was the last time we really led it. We haven't had a Western Hemispheric strategy, which is crazy to say. I mean, when you think about it. American strategy at the birth of the Republic, 250 years ago, was driven by two imperatives: to secure the continent on the one hand, and also to keep the Europeans out. And that was such a pillar of American strategy and a constant feature straight through the 1980s. And then in the 90s, we decided we didn't have to do it anymore. That strategy in the Western Hemisphere was over. We don't need to man Southcom. We don't need the Panama Canal. We don't need a facility at Roosevelt Roads, like all the stuff. We don't need gunnery practice on Vieques. Although Vieques is nice as a tourist destination, I'll give them that. I've been there; it's pleasant. But all this stuff that used to be a commonplace for 2 centuries of American grand strategy, we just let it go. And so now what's happening as a consequence of that is that to use a technical term, the region's going to hell. Venezuela is hemorrhaging people on a wartime level. Russian and Chinese troops are marching through the Zocalo in Mexico City, on parade, which is crazy to say. That happened last September. I tell people this in the policy world, they're kind of shocked. Like, oh, really? The Russians were in Mexico City? Yeah, absolutely they are. Did you know that the largest Russian diplomatic presence in the world is in Mexico? It's just because they love Mexico that much. They just think it's such a great place that they want to send literally thousands of diplomatic personnel there. We need, as Americans, as estadounidenses, we need to rediscover the reality that we're not exempt from the law of nations. We may think of ourselves as a nation anointed, in history. I don't think that's true, by the way, but it is the American civic religion. And as a consequence of that, we take very foolish chances and exempt ourselves from duties that every other nation has, including the duty to have a strategy. And it's going to be, a strategy is going to be imposed on us if we don't choose one. But we have not chosen one yet. And until we do, things will get worse.
By the way, I'm volunteering. Anybody who wants to vote for me for president, I promise to be president, and I promise to surrender power. I also promise to tear up executive orders 2 a day until Congress can get ahead of these things and write their laws. So there you go. There's my platform.
I just, if you become president, Pete, I want an appointment to the American Battle Monuments Commission, because I want to live in a house off of a French cemetery somewhere in the Rhone Valley. And spend the rest of my days there on the taxpayer dime. So please keep that in mind.
As long as you promise to go to that island in Canada that's half island, half French, half Canada soil, and build something for us there, and we'll just claim, boom, this is our island. Since they're undecided, we'll decide. I want that island. That'll be my one push.
Sure, happy to do it.
Okay. So we have a policy right now of sort of indifference about people coming across the border. Now, there's a lot of things that come with that. Some of that is that we are allowing people to escape persecution and danger. So we'll go ahead and give that granted, right? But at some point, the people who have means to come up here, we are robbing their home country of their capability to go produce in Bolivia, in China, in whatever country they're coming from. We are taking these people and putting them into our world and hopefully inculcating them in a way that it makes America better than it already is. It seems to me, though, short-sighted to absorb all of these people from other nations, especially in South America, where, grasps on stability are tenuous.
Yeah, it's I guess there's 2 or 3 questions in there, or observations.
Yes, there is.
Yeah. Let's try to unpeel them. The United States right now, I think, has the largest proportion of foreign-born. I don't know if it's in our history or if it's equal to like the Ellis Island waves, but it is a gigantic proportion. And part of the problem with the influx of foreign-born right now is that there are several million, and it really is several million, that we have no idea who they are because they entered illegally. And that's an existential threat to the nation. And I want to be clear, it's not an existential threat because of the people as such. The eruption of Honduran values into community X is not going to bring down the United States. What will bring down the United States is the end of the rule of law and the end of the most basic fundamental quality of a nation, which is the ability to determine who's within and who's without your polity. Look, I am, Pete, this from our email correspondence. I do a lot of genealogical research. I've come to find in the past few years that it's probable that 3 of my 4 Mexican great-grandparents were probably illegally in the United States at some point. Now, illegal entries between like 1910 and 1930. And but when they came in, into the U.S., again, probably illegally, which is a rational inference I'm making based upon records that we have extant. The numbers were so small that it didn't really matter that much because you were talking, literally a few hundred, maybe a few thousand coming across the Texas border, the majority of whom eventually went back to the United States after they held an illegal job or something like that. And we have to understand that in the past 10 to 15 years, that's become qualitatively different. Every single person who crosses the border now illegally is trafficked and or smuggled. It's a meaningless distinction in my view for our purposes, but they are all part of a cartel network that by virtue of their presence extends into the United States. And to me, the threat comes less from them, although the fact of their presence is a threat, and more from the presence of the sponsoring networks and cartels that end civil society in the United States with their wealth and their power and their metastasizing presence that corrupts and overthrows local law enforcement, local governance, and so on. And that's what I think we need to focus on quite a bit.
There's a lot of, and I say this quite often about places like San Francisco that are attempting to do really big things here. And in California, we have a responsibility to try to look forward, but there's also a responsibility to get things right. And so there's a lot of inhumanity in the humanity of San Francisco. And there's a lot of inhumanity in the humanity of allowing people to come across the border to whatever the goal is. And we don't get comfortable with that inhumanity because we tend to not study it. Look, I went down to the border a couple of years back, and the judge down in Del Rio County was kind enough to talk to me. And he explained to me, he's like, I'm not provisioned for this. And that means the people in my county, I can't do the job that they elected me to do because I'm handling federal problems by myself down here. And so he was exporting his extra people to San Antonio. And guess what San Antonio didn't like? They didn't like that. And this problem now, a couple of years later, has gotten so big that there's a whole political conversation on Texas saying, hey, we can't process all of these people. You guys want them, here they come. And so there's inhumanity reigning through all this entire federal policy. But I don't know that we give a damn.
Well, I guess it'd be helpful for me to. Where do you see the inhumanity in this particular case? What would be
Well,
the?
when you create a system that allows for trafficking, that allows
Oh, I
for
see.
sales into sexual slavery, when you people can be exploited for the desire to get up here, we just seem to be indifferent about it. You allow people to come in illegally, they aren't even able to inculcate into a society that is like, hey, we'd love to help you, we'd love to do whatever. All of these things are sort of ripped away because the person is extra legal at best, right? If not becoming illegal, and so we just end up having all of this trauma that comes out of these things, kids being trafficked. That's a pretty horrible thing for the rest of their lives if they live long enough to have a long life. I'm not cool with that as a citizen. I'm all for a very liberal immigration policy, but it has to be a policy that's provisioned in Congress and works within like its means. You want to make it bigger? Fine, pass more legislation and figure out how to fund it. But I don't see us doing that. I see us being sort of indifferent about it. And this goes to a lot of the things we've done in foreign policy where we look at a goal. We want to allow these people to come in. We want to go empower females in Afghanistan. And then we half-ass it because that's what we did with the females in Afghanistan. And then we leave. And then what happens to them? Well, the worst things you can imagine because, we didn't have the guts to do the work.
Have you ever told your audience about the trafficking safe house that I took you to and on the U.S. Mexico border?
We might have mentioned it once or twice, but yeah, it's not a thing that I've brought up a whole lot. But yeah, let's talk about it.
Well, so Pete, I guess for those watching, we had a group of 4 or 5 individuals with us in Presidio County, Texas, Big Bend country. And when you drive to the northwest of Presidio, Texas, which is across the river from Ojinaga, very, very old settled community at the Junta de los Rios there. I think there's been continuous habitation for something like 5,000 years. Like it's a settlement that predates some of the pyramids, if I remember correctly. When you drive about halfway to Candelaria, there's an adobe house off to the side. It's pretty easy to spot from the road. And you walk out there, and it is a trafficking safe house. And you remember what we saw? There was a soiled mattress and women's clothing and discarded children's shoes. And it was. You could infer that some pretty disgusting things were happening at the safe house, and that to me is a signal of qualitatively what's happening with trafficking throughout. You're right; it's an inhumane system, and I think it's one thing that we need to understand, that this human trafficking that we see at the border is a revival of a very ancient evil, and it's one that supposedly was outlawed in 1808 in the United States, which is commerce in man, international commerce in man. It is the sale of humanity, because as people are sold or sell themselves into these trafficking networks, what they find is that they're never free of it. They're going to pay one way or the other. They're either going to pay in cash, they'll pay in labor. You'll get young boys and young men conscripted into cartel gangs who are then compelled to do horrible things to fellow human beings. The women have, and the girls, unfortunately, have payment extracted from them in rape if they don't have cash, or sometimes even if they do have cash. And so by the time they reach the border, there's a general traumatization. Once they get across, though, they're still in the network. They're still there. They're still enforcers in their communities, wherever they end up, because the cartels know where they end up. And even there, this is kind of the malign genius of the business model of the trafficking cartels, is that once they reach Portland or Detroit or Chicago or Dallas or wherever it is that they're going, they're still paying into a system through remittances, and they have become U.S.-based profit centers for the cartel essentially forever. And there's not a lot of getting out of that for them. And yeah, inhumane, 100%. And it's something that, if we not to be reductionist about it, but a lot of our friends, particularly on the left, well-meaning people, by the way, I don't want to impugn their motives, but a lot of the folks who are horrified at, say, a border wall, need to understand, and often fail to understand, that if you care about the humanity of these people, erecting that border barrier infrastructure is the most humane thing you can do, because it stops the traffic and stops the trade.
While you were talking, I was working on some production. Look at me. Look at this. I got a picture of Josh Treviño.
There we go.
thing. And it's not a great picture of it, but you get an idea of the quality of the house. There's not a lot there, and then you don't see the
another
mattresses
Mexican at the border.
Yeah, but that's there it was, and we were basically in the outer Marfa area when we had that. We took that picture. But yeah, you're right. You see these things, these mechanisms. The border's huge, and if you wanted to avoid detection, you could do it all the time. We didn't even talk about the inhumanity of the danger of getting across this border and all of the alert way stations where it's like, hey, I've put myself into a terrible pickle in this desert. Beep, 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 I need help. And if you can get to the beep, 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 I need help machine, but people are walking themselves to death to try to get here, in part because we don't have the capacity to create the capacity to bring these people in some kind of sane and humane way.
Yeah, that's right. 100%. There really is no nice part of the U.S.-Mexico border. Maybe north of Tijuana, I suppose, because San Diego is beautiful. But you don't have to go very far east of Greater Metro San Diego to start encountering the arid zones and the desert and the place where there's no water. And that's basically how it is for the next 2,000 miles or so. And so there's places that are easier than others, but none of it's good. And the heat there, again, Pete, as you've experienced, is terrific. I mean, it is 106, 108. Paradoxically, you'll be in the middle of a desert location, and then you'll make it down into the Rio Grande, not even a valley, but like a riverbed, so to speak, that depression, and there is thick as heck, jungle type humidity, just in that river bottom, right? And it pounds you out. Like it is a difficult place, which is one reason, sometime your viewers ought to look up Brooks County in Texas. Now, Brooks County is, I think, 3 counties in from the border, so it's not even close to the border. But illegals making their way north into Texas through the Rio Grande Valley tend to die. I mean, this is a horribly clinical thing to say, but they tend to die in Brooks County. And the reason they tend to die in Brooks County is because that's where basically the wilderness is. There's probably no vegetation there that's higher than a man's head, right? So it's not even like tall trees or anything like that, but it's so thick and it's so dry, and there's so many snakes and insects and dust out there that people die there and they're never found again. And it's by the hundreds every year. Yeah.
Makes me proud to be an American.
It's ridiculous. It's multi-causal. I mean, we didn't. This is sort of the line from a lot of the authoritarian left governments in Latin America, including the one in Mexico, unfortunately, which is that this is basically a problem that the United States created through, and I've sat in offices in Mexico City where well-meaning leftists have said, well, it's the 200 years of American intervention in the region have created the instability that leads to the migration crisis. Not really. None of that's actually true. In theory, this won't happen, by the way, so it's not a basis for policymaking. But in theory, if the nations in Latin America were governed well and governed equitably and governed sanely, there wouldn't be mass migration away from them. It's not imposed on them by climate or anything else. These are governance choices, and they have repercussions in real lives, and we're experiencing part of that.
When you here in America, we see the same thing. I drive through a lot of different states, and you see the differences in the results of governing and how they are governed by other places. This parts of the South, if you get off the main roads, you get off the state routes, and even smaller, you see just how lack of presence there is, and the poverty that's there. You get to Texas and you see heavy highway construction going on because you guys are booming with people. California is we're doing what we do out here, which sometimes drives me a little crazy. But, there's a lot of different ways to do this, and they are all better than what's south of us for the most part.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's true. It was always amazing to me. I mean, I understood it for sure, but when we lived in Chicagoland several years back, it was amazing to me that even an obviously dying metro area like Chicagoland was still preferable to Michoacan, right? And Chicago, I mean, Chicago is violent. It's on a downswing. It's not nice anymore. But even that was better than staying in Tierra Caliente in Mexico. So that tells you how bad it is there.
I have the sense that we'll go to Canada. Canada will come down to us, and that's a pretty open exchange. Everybody kind of gets along. Maybe Canada's a little bit too nice for our feelings, and I'll probably make some jokes about bald eagles and freedom and having the queen on the wall, that kind of thing. But for the
Mhm.
most part, pretty even free exchange. Is that true also of Mexico? Like, or do we go south as much as they come north? Do we enjoy that permissibility that we have? The temporary permissibility of like, hey, I'm coming to visit to go to Tijuana or Rosarito or Monterey or, down to Mexico City.
Yeah, I actually think Mexico. A lot of Americans go to Mexico, and Mexico City in particular. I believe I would double check the stat, but I believe Mexico has the largest number of the U.S. nationals expatriated of any country in the world, which makes
Mm.
sense, right? It's reasonably affordable. You can have a style of living there on a modest salary that you absolutely could not have in Cleveland or Dallas or San Antonio or any place like that. And
Yeah.
so, I personally would not move my family to Mexico City, but if it were just me, knowing everything that I know about the governance and things like that, I still would probably give it a go for a couple of years. Because the things about Mexico, I'm glad you asked this because it gives me an opportunity to say good things about Mexico.
Yes.
I mean, it is a great country with a horrible government. A good friend of mine described Mexico as what happens when you have a good country whose elites do not care about it at all.
Yeah.
And that, which increasingly describes the United States, right? But it's absolutely
Well,
true of Mexico. When you peel back the layers, the fact that the president is in with the narcos and things like that, and kind of go back that at a ground level, I can think of neighborhoods in Mexico City, which is the part that I'm most familiar with, that are absolutely charming and frankly have a quality of life for children that is superior to what you get in average American suburbia. A local church, a plaza, markets. Now my view is skewed because I buy in dollars, right? So I have to keep that. I have to keep that in mind. But as with all things, it's nicer if you have income. But if you do have a modest income in Mexico City, it can be a surprisingly attractive place to be. And there's a lot of the country that is like that too, especially if you really want a more traditionalist and maybe sedate way of life and set of cultural values that are very hard to find here. So yeah, there's a lot of Americans down there, but all those Americans have arrived into Mexico legally of their
yeah.
own.
Well, there's
Yeah.
there's that.
You know,
Yeah. The other thing about all of that exchange of Mexico to America, America to Mexico, I think overall the policies that we have for trade seem to have improved in both directions over time. But again, this is Pete thinking this. Has our trade improved? I think it's our biggest trade partner because there it is so immediate. But or do we need to do work there still in terms of our trade with Mexico?
I think the jury's out on a lot of it. Mexico did recently become our biggest trade partner, but a lot of that is because Chinese firms have moved to Mexico,
Mhm.
and so that's been very difficult to disentangle. Mexico has not done a very good job of attracting, attracting a lot of the nearshoring that was supposed to be a consequence of the U.S.-China disengagement. So I think the jury's out on that. A lot of what one thinks about the post 1994 trade regime with Mexico depends on what you think the trade is for. I think it
Mm.
is indisputable that on a macro level, it has probably mutually enriched both countries. But we need to understand, and this is something that has come to the fore in the 2020s, I think very legitimately, that the price tag for that, especially on the U.S. side, was pretty steep. I mean, we chose to, without explicitly saying it, we chose to sacrifice a variety of industrial towns in the American heartland on the altar of generalized prosperity based on greater trade, because the life of those towns and the life of those communities that used to be in places like Ohio or Wisconsin or Tennessee or wherever ended up in Nuevo León and Tamaulipas and the Bajío and things like that. Instead of American workers as Mexican workers, and there's probably my libertarian friends are throwing up their hands and saying, "Well, don't you like a cheap iPhone?" Yeah, sure, I like a cheap iPhone, but I like American small towns better.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's something that trade policy in general, this is not just specific to Mexico, has lost sight of badly, and it explains a lot of why conservative populism is on the rise now in the United States for very legitimate reasons, in my view.
Can Texas and the U.S. federal government at the executive branch level, can they get along?
Yeah, I mean, sure. If the feds live up to their obligations under the Constitution, of course, that they absolutely can. Texas from independence in 1836, and then we had statehood, or what I call the Great Mistake, in 1845. I'm kidding, by the way. It's been good. Texas had no choice but to join the United States from a strategic level. Otherwise, we would have been erased, I think, from existence. Unfortunate, but true. To statehood, and then really through to about 1920 or so, Texas was compelled to maintain the means of its own self-defense from chaos on the frontier and chaos emanating from Mexico. And the last, I mean, I'll spare you the century of history behind that, but the last expression of that was really the 1915 Plan de San Diego, which was a Mexican plan to conduct a genocide in South Texas of Anglos, basically all non-Mexicans. And it was a ferocious plan, thankfully intercepted and defeated by the Texas Rangers, who then went on to commit a variety of their own atrocities in subsequent years. But since 1920, though, the federal government actually did I have to put it in past tense at this point, did a good job of defending the Texas frontier, which it did not do for the preceding century. In 1920, that kind of changed. Mexico itself also changed, became a kind of a one-party dictatorship for about 80 years or so. And Texas didn't have to think about its own external self-defense. And so we became sort of a normal state. I'll put that in quotes. All that's over. The federal government clearly today, especially under the Biden regime, absolutely believes that the interests of Texas are a thing to be sacrificed on the interests of their own ideological preferences. And Texas is expected to submit to an open border, to an invasion of several million people and their traffickers. And so Texas has to, Texas is in a strategic position now where we have to contend against a hostile Washington, D.C. and a hostile Mexico City. In many ways, it doesn't have to be that way. Mexico is what it is. Washington, D.C. can simply do its job, can meet its obligations under the Constitution, and then Texas has shown for well a century plus that we're happy to live in the federal union that adheres to the guarantees made to all the states. But until that happens, there will be conflict between us because we're not going to submit.
If Pete becomes president by some crazy miracle, and I do go down and see Joshua Treviño, and I say, I want you to be my encargado de negociados, the negotiation, my charge d'affaires in Mexico.
Sure.
What do you? And I'm going to give you not just a carte blanche to dine in luxury, but also carte blanche in terms of policy and everything. What do you want to change? Like, what are 2 or 3 things you'd want to fix or improve in 3 to 4 years?
If I were the Turner administration's ambassador in Mexico, is that what you're asking me?
Yeah. Well, I'm putting you above the ambassador. You're like my guy to go deal with these things. So you're going to task out the ambassador.
Oh, wow. Okay. Linking trade and security. Job one. Mm-hmm. Linking trade and security. That's going to be it. USMCA, which is a successor to NAFTA, is good, and I like it, and I support it, and I like cross-border trade. But at the same time, it can no longer be unconditional. It just can't. There's got to be security in exchange for trade, and if you don't deliver security, then there's no trade. Sorry, that's it. That's job number one. Job number two is that the criminal prosecutorial strategy has to change. We've tried going after low-level people. We've tried the so-called kingpin strategy, in which we go after cartel bosses. You know who we've never really gone after is the politicians that sponsor them, the politicians that partner with them. I am, in candor, I'm interested in cartel bosses going to jail, but I'm vastly more interested in the governors, presidents, ministers, and generals who fly political cover for them. That's going to generate change too. And so I think the end of that impunity, I mean, look, I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but that's my 2-step solution right there. Link trade and security and take away the immunity of the political class. And I think that is going to be enough, is my guess, enough to give Mexicans themselves, not Americans, the cover they need to affect real change. Because look, as much as we suffer from the dysfunction of the Mexican state, they suffer more. The primary victims of the corrupt Mexican state are Mexicans, and as neighbors, we wish them well, and if we can give them an opportunity to set things right, we ought to.
Yeah. How are they dealing with all of the incursion into their country that they're experiencing as the throughway to our country?
It's very interesting to see how that's played out. Ideologically, migration and migrants occupy what to me is a very strange place in Mexican civic society. Keep in mind too that Mexico's experience is of a pass-through country, right? And so when they get a population of 20,000 Haitians or folks from Cameroon. There used to be a Cameroonian colony in Pueblo Laredo, by the way, which is an odd thing. They're all there illegally waiting to cross. Or now we've had issues with several thousand Chinese males, PRC citizen males coming through. None of them intend. I mean, many of them spend a lot of time in Mexico, but none of them intend to stop there. And so there's sort of a perception that whatever this is going to be transient. There's also an ideological perception that what they're doing is intrinsically virtuous. That you would not interfere with human trafficking, honestly, but you wouldn't interfere with migrants and migration because there is no unvirtuous migration. It is intrinsically good what they are doing, and that's understandable to an extent. But it's what all that signifies is there really is an unwillingness to crack down on that. It's an American problem. It's something for the Yankees. We're just the pass-through country. They could solve it anytime they want to, and they choose not to. Therefore, we're going to profit from it while it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. How much are we in agreement with Mexico? Like, we can't make Mexico do what we want them to do completely. And they can't compel us any more than we want to either. But are we that out of sync, do you think?
Profoundly. Yeah. I think we're profoundly out of sync at this point.
Okay.
And we have tried to, I don't want to overstate our reach. I mean, as your viewers know, I work for a think tank, and so we're engaged in the policy sphere. But when we talk to anybody, and we don't have a dog in Mexican politics, dog in that hunt, and so on the few occasions, and there have been few, unfortunately, on the few occasions, because most people affiliated with the Mexican state don't want to talk to what they call ultraderecha, ultra rightists, which for us is like normal Republicans or normal conservatives. But when we have gotten to talk to people, I mean, we've tried to sound the alarm, as recently as 3 weeks ago when we were in Mexico City, and say, hey, this is something you need to pay attention to. Americans have this perception, we view it as a crisis. And I will tell you in candor, the impression that I get is that they don't take it seriously. And my fear is that they're not going to take it seriously until it is way too late, until a real crisis is upon us. And at that point, the solution set is going to veer much more toward end states that I'd prefer to avoid.
Yeah. I don't want you to say yes or no, but is there a chance greater than 25% that we end up in some kind of a war with Mexico in the next 10 years?
You said you don't want me to say yes or no to that? That's quite a question to ask for no answer.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, is there a percentage? Like, where would you put the percent? Like, if you were a betting man, like, would you say, the under is 20% or something like that? I mean, there's always a chance, right? There's always a greater than zero chance.
Well, I'm not dodging. I want to be clear what I'm about to say.
It's not an easy question too. So
no, but I think you have to go back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show, which is that there's a spectrum of conflict, right? So if you're asking me if is there like a declared war and there's like Zachary Taylor Part 2, that's a 0% chance. That's not going to happen. But could I see a future administration becoming exasperated and deciding that they can kill, El Guapo and the Sinaloan Highlands with one of those, what they call that missile that has the swords come out of it? You know what I'm talking about? That's a non-zero chance. I mean, it really is. And I want to be clear. I'm actually not an advocate for military intervention in Mexico, but what I've been trying to communicate to a lot of our Mexican friends is that that's not off the table anymore in U.S. politics. I mean, it really isn't, and for legit reasons. Fentanyl coming from Mexico has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, and that is classically understood. That's casus bellum, and so I think it's a non-zero chance that there's something like that happens by the end of the decade. But it won't be. It'll be short of. It won't be Russia, Ukraine, for example. It won't even be Winfield Scott. Yeah.
I'll be the intel guy and just say that there are target packages for every one of them dudes. And on occasion, they get put on someone's desk and they probably get, not today. But sometimes it's the Soleimani packet and it's like, yes, today. And then those things can happen. So there is the real chance those things can happen. Right. Hey, let's not talk about misery, destruction, and the killing of it, people. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we just don't know about Mexico and Texas border area history. I mean, there's all these different groups. I like to remind myself when I see someone who's of Mexican descent, I'm like, damn Spaniard. And I just can't hold that anger because I don't even know what it means. But I just remind myself, like, these are Spanish people, at some point. And it's kind of a funny exercise. So let's play with that a little bit. What are some of the, you're so great at this kind of thing. You know so much.
Well, what do you want me to play with? I'm sorry, just the Spanish.
Just like the different ethnic pockets and pools and histories that have happened because Texas and Mexico are there, and there is a lot of European descent, and there's traces of that. And we could talk about Cabeza de Vaca and how crazy it is that he walked around all that place naked and, becoming a faith healer across the nation. Surviving as a slave, like that's all crazy.
If you want to get somebody walking around in public naked in South Texas now, you have to go to South Padre at spring break. That's basically what's restricted to at this point.
Type that down there.
Write that down. Look, South Texas. I'm biased, as you know. I'll explain to your viewers. South Texas is a beloved place. It is not a nice place. It is hot. It's unpleasant. The landscape's not pretty. But the history, if you know it, if you got a connection to it, to my mind, is unparalleled. And you get towns like Laredo, founded in 1755, well predating the United States. You get Roma, Texas, and Laredo is my dad's hometown. We're descended from the founder of Laredo, which is actually pretty common in Laredo, by the way. So it's not like a mark of royalty or anything like that. Roma, my grandfather's hometown, Roma, Texas, founded 1765 as Los Saints. All up and down that section of the border, really from Laredo to the mouth of the Rio Grande, is the old Nuevo Santander settlement, and that was a Spanish settlement. The Kingdom of Nuevo Santander, a guy named Escandon, got the grants to settle it. And what's interesting is that the families that moved there, essentially in around the 1750s, really 1750s to 1770s, 1780s, they're all still there. They moved there, and then nobody else came, and they stayed put. And it's resulted in a very unique community. It is versus a lot of other Mexican communities. You go to Mexico City, and you can really see the indigenous heritage there, Michoacan or Guerrero or anything like that. And it's obvious that Mexico is like this mestizo nation with Spanish and Indian mixed together. Up in Nuevo Santander and Nuevo León, you don't see that nearly as much. You see people like me. I'm half Mexican, and it's not uncommon to see folks me who are pale and blue eyes. I used to have red hair. You'll have to take my word for that. But what was interesting when I was young is that my red hair and pale skin and blue eyes came from my Mexican side of my family, because it did not come from my mother's Anglo side. And that's just a unique. There's also a Jewish heritage there. A lot of Sephardic Jews ended up in Nuevo León and Monterrey, and ended up in South Texas as well. That's been another thing that I found out in the past year, that we have Sephardic ancestry. Apparently, one of my great grandmothers, a woman named Panfila Pizania, was a crypto Jew. Wouldn't eat pork tamales, which had pork tamales. They're the best. So there's only one reason not to eat them, which is that you fear God. And
that's right.
That's anyway. It's very rich, and we could do a whole show on that, Pete. But thanks for giving me the opportunity to wax out.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
And a way to nail the landing for me to wrap this thing up with everybody. So this is Josh's show right down here. Here's the link for it. It's called Hard Country. You just heard him blast away for about 50 minutes. He does the same thing with his partner on that show. It's all fantastic. You get a chance to really learn about these things. So don't rely just on news media outlets. Go talk to people that focus on this thing, and then go find people that disagree with Josh, and you'll learn more about all those things too. So it's really, I love the Hard Country. It's right down there. Definitely go check that out. Yeah, who knew? I also have Jewish ancestry. I've got Ashkenazi guys who were Kapellmeisters in Chicago.
Really?
Why? Who knows? Yeah. They were musicians that ran churches that still exist in Chicago. So I got to go up there and go take a look at that. Anyhow, I got 10 more seconds for you. Anything you want to say before I wrap this up?
Pete, thanks for all that you do, both for the country and for good media here on BIDS. So we appreciate it.
All right, cool.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.